vague. And in particular, this idea of metadata was being used as a sort of excuse, as a way of saying, well, we're not sort of recording people's conversations and listening to them directly, but instead we're just collecting a bit of additional information, a bit of metadata about just about the call records rather than what people are saying. And that was meant to kind of to reassure people that the government wasn't spying on them directly. And so what I wanted to do in that little piece was just to sort of show, hopefully in a kind of compelling way, what you could learn using some basic methods of social network analysis with this data. And I had this Paul Revere data set from something else I had been doing, just as a general introduction, actually, to social network methods that I had done for some graduate students at Duke, and I thought, hey, this is I'm not an American myself, but this is a nice, compelling example of just how far you can get with just a little bit of metadata, and so I wrote that up, and it got a lot of circulation. Over the following few weeks, I think about 250,000 people saw it, and so and it gets picked up periodically in these kind of debates. So that was the background behind that piece.
That's awesome. And could you explain for us, because I'm not sure that we know exactly what you mean when you say it's not an article, but it was a blog post. Can you really briefly go into what the difference might be? I don't think we've discussed that terribly.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if you saw it directly on my own website on kieranhealy.org. So that's just a website that I've maintained myself for a long time, and somewhat regularly, maybe once or twice a month these days. I usually write something up for it, sometimes nothing very serious, and occasionally a bit of data analysis that I'm doing. But I publish it myself directly to the web, right? And so anybody can read it, but there's no peer review or anything like that. And so in a scholarly article, what happens is that you write up your article and then you send it into a journal, like the American Sociological Review or the American Journal of Sociology or whatever. That journal has an editor who sends it out to anonymously to peer review, and so that means he sends it out to 3 or 4 other academics. They give their opinions on it. They write up a report, a paragraph saying, well, here's, it's like getting feedback from your teacher, except it's your peers, and then the editor decides whether to accept or reject the article on that basis. And so kind of that's the standard, right, for scientific publications. And a blog post that is much easier. There's no filter, and so of course I think my standards are quite high, but and this is not also written in a style. This is not meant as a piece of original research, and so that's also what a peer-reviewed article is supposed to be. And so this is more like this is like a teaching article or something where you can just kind of say, well, here's something we know, and here's an accessible way to try and understand it, and it's put up with it for anybody to see, like lecture notes.
Well, it definitely was very entertaining for us. I really enjoyed it, and I've had a lot of success both with this sociology class and with my U.S. history classes I had. Let's open it up to the floor. Do you all have any questions about the paper in general or about sociology as a career and or Kieran's career? Anyone, go for it.
How does your writings affect your political opinions, or vice versa, your political opinions affect your writing? And I would also...
Right. No, that's a good question, especially, in the case of something like social science, the distance between what you might think politically and what you might be interested in terms of your research is much narrower, right, than in several other fields, like in physics or in geology or something. Maybe your politics matters a lot less. In my case, now there are a lot of different perspectives on this. In my case, I don't know if you've ever read any Max Weber in your class, but I try to take a pretty strong line between the idea is that your political values or your personal beliefs always and kind of unavoidably guide what it is that you're interested in studying in social science, because if you don't care about something or if you're not interested in it, then you're unlikely to do any interesting work on it. But once you start studying it and doing the research, then a different sort of set of values take over, ones that are kind of governed by standards of kind of honesty and integrity in research. And it can be quite difficult if you really care about something. And this is a very common experience in in social research, if you really care about something and you want to find the answer, and you collect a bunch of data and you do some analysis, and then it starts to turn out that it's not what you thought, then sometimes that can be kind of a difficult pill to swallow if the answer isn't the right one with respect to your values. And so what you have to do is kind of, you come to value also the process of finding things out, regardless of whether it jived with what your previous opinion was. So there's a sort of back and forth. And then of course once you find things out that might change, you update your own opinions too. And so there's that sort of back and forth. But you're right that the connection between the two in social science is trickier than in other fields.
And Ms. Nippy, you had a follow-up question?
I don't know if you want to answer this, but what are your political opinions on NSA surveillance?
On NSA surveillance specifically, well, I think I'm quite uncomfortable with it. In part because my feeling is that these methods now are extremely powerful, and the sort of scope of one of the things that's happened over the last 30 years in American society, in particular, and a lot of Western societies, is that just the sort of scope and scale of data collection capacity that states have has expanded enormously, and not just states, but also companies. Like if you have a Facebook account, or if you're on Twitter, or you use Instagram, then essentially many of the same patterns apply, right? Except that in the case of things like Facebook or Tumblr or Instagram, people are happily shoveling personal information at the companies, whereas in the case of the state, it's kind of done secretly. And so in both cases, there's like there are reasonable grounds to expect, states want to collect information on threats to their own security, and companies want to collect information to better serve their customers. But once you get this kind of explosion in the capacity to collect stuff, then that makes all sorts of new things possible that maybe we haven't sort of thought about explicitly. So it makes me, on the one hand, it's very exciting, kind of, because like social science exists, thrives on the analysis of data like this. It's kind of cool to think that there's like huge databases of really detailed information about them, about people. But then on the other hand, it's also makes you a little bit nervous. It makes me a little bit nervous anyway.
Thank you so much. Good question. Someone else, sir.
Where do you think this data collection is going to go in the future?
I don't know. I think that's partly in the NSA case specifically. That's kind of very much a political question about what limits the U.S. Political community chooses to place on this kinds of collection. In terms of kind of purely technical capacity, both to collect and to analyze data, it's going to continue to expand. And so, and again, I should emphasize, this is not just a matter of kind of the government collecting information. This is really a general feature of how information is exchanged and transmitted now in modern societies. And so, out in Silicon Valley, there's a gigantic engineering effort being put into just finding ways to collect and efficiently analyze huge quantities of data. Like in the 1970s and 80s, when network analysis in its modern form was just getting started, the largest social networks that sociologists and other social scientists analyzed were they had a few hundred people in them at the outside, because that was all the information that was available that you could realistically collect, and computers weren't powerful enough to do anything more with data sets bigger than that. And now, Facebook has 1.5 billion active users, so it's just going to continue to expand, and our ability in analytical terms to analyze that stuff is catching up, computationally. So it's going to continue to grow, I think.
Good question. Before we get to Ms. Fitzgerald's question, what you said, Kieran, reminded me of an article I was just reading about Facebook, which was talking about all these social scientists who are now working for Facebook and sort of working to do the trust analytics there, and how they were surprised when Facebook does its analytics. They have millions of data points at a minimum, as compared with sometimes the famous social study, we talked about the Stanford prison experiment. Well, that was 30 days. So, the size with which we're working actually allows us to do a lot more interesting stuff.
Yeah, it makes social scientists kind of a little bit giddy, I think, with excitement because like the Science magazine just published this study just last Friday about Facebook's news feed and how people who self-identified politically on Facebook responded to various different items in their news feed, and that was done by Lada Adamic, who's a social scientist at the University of Michigan, and a couple of other colleagues of hers. And that data set, they just took like a 3% sample of US Facebook users over a couple of weeks, and they had something like 15 million data points. And so that's really astonishing, just that the scope of coverage that Facebook has. So there are a lot of people. I know several former graduate students of ours in the program at Duke, and others that I know. They go out to work either for Facebook or for Google, or to other large, or to Twitter. All of these companies essentially have like huge quantities of data, and they have computer scientists who know how to collect and manage data on that scale, but they don't have. They've started to hire more and more social scientists to dig into some of the details of the data that they've collected.
Very cool. Thank you, Ms. Fitzgerald.
I guess my question is, like, why does it matter that they're doing this if we have nothing to hide, I guess?
Oh, that's a good question. Right. Well, you know, in psychology, there's this very nice. There's different ways to answer that question. One of them that I like is that, like, the psychologists have this idea. Psychologists who study identity have this idea that having an identity, having a personal identity, is very closely related to having secrets. That one of the things that it means to be yourself is to know things about yourself that nobody else knows, and so the idea of having just a single identity that's immediately available in public to everybody, even aside from kind of all of the legal and political issues of citizenship and your rights to privacy and so on, if you just think of it in terms of kind of your own personal life, having all of the information available to everybody is this very strange and kind of disturbing, I think, experience socially that to have. And so even if you think that you're a good person and you don't have anything to hide, which is totally reasonable, it's very strange for people to live in that kind of way. I think they're not really cut out for it. Now that's all aside from kind of political questions about how much information people have a right to about you. So there's a whole normative, side that just sort of says where people argue about how much information the government ought to know about you, or how much information a company ought to know about you, and whether they should get your consent first. All of those issues are extremely important, and I think that there are lots of political arguments that saying, well, look, it doesn't matter whether you have something to hide or not. It's a matter of whether the government or any other organization has any sort of direct right to know anything about you if you don't tell them. But even aside from that, just thinking about what it would be like to live your life if everybody knew everything about you, I think makes it hard to think about how you. I think it would be a strange way to live, and maybe sort of a disturbing way to live.
Absolutely. Good question. I'm sure there are other questions, but I was kind of wondering. This is mostly a class of sophomores. We have a couple freshmen, a couple juniors, a couple seniors. So it'll be a couple years before they're in college, although our school does send a handful of students to Duke every year.
Mm-hmm.
When they get to college and possibly are taking a sociology course, what might they expect? How might that be different from the broad survey that they're doing now?
One of the features of the field of sociology is that its substantive scope is really wide. You can get sociology of ... can cover a very wide range of things. And so I teach the introductory course to freshmen at Duke fairly regularly. And so that's like a large survey class, maybe not that different, in its coverage from what you're doing. But then I also teach specifically a course on organizations and companies, and how management works inside companies. And so that's like a very tiny slice of sociology that just kind of focuses on life inside formal organizations. And then, whereas several of my colleagues teach, my colleague Professor Bach teaches a course on sociology of gender, which is about sort of sex roles and gender roles in society. Another teaches a course focused specifically on China and the transformations of the Chinese economy, right? So there's like really, once you get to the college level, the specifics of courses that you take become much more kind of focused, and then in sociology in particular, the range that could cover will be quite wide. And then in addition to the substantive stuff, you'll get a good deal more training in the way of research methods, both kind of things like statistics or quantitative methods, which I use in my own research, or qualitative methods, things like interviewing or ethnography, participant observation, that kind of stuff. And so there'd be specific classes devoted to those as well.
Thanks. Another question? Someone who hasn't gone. Go ahead.
Do you mostly use pre-collected data, or do you go and collect data?
That's good. That's actually a really good question. Yeah, I've used a mix of data in my own work. So I have collected data of my own and reconstructed qualitative and quantitative data from archives and done interviews and so on. But then also a lot of my work has involved just kind of analyzing data that other organizations collect, like official government statistics or other things like that. So like just last weekend, just over the weekend, I was looking at results from the election in the UK, in the United Kingdom. And so to get the data for that, I wrote some code to scrape or to grab all of the election results by constituency from the BBC website where they were published. And then that gave me like a nice big table of all of the candidates who had run for election by party in the UK, and I was able to draw some nice maps of how the results turned out. And so that's a case of using data that's collected by some other organization, but you still have to do some work in order to get it into shape to do anything more specific or analyze things in more detail with.
Interesting. Mr. Sanders?
Do you know the data collection of the U.S. compared to the rest of the world? Like, what is the comparison between the U.S.?
You mean just kind of how good it is, or how much is available?
Like, how much the U.S. focuses on data collection?
Oh, you mean like, or do you mean sort of? I'm sorry, I can't quite hear. Do you mean like with respect to things like surveillance of individuals?
Yeah.
Okay. My understanding is, so I'm not an expert on national security, but my understanding is, that all major governments have extensive data collection efforts, and spying on each other and collecting data on their own citizens. The U.S., I think, has by far the largest. The U.S. has by far the largest military budget of any country in the world. It's larger than I think all other military budgets combined almost, and so a good chunk of that goes to surveillance. And so the U.S. operation is larger than any others in the world. And then beyond that, it's hard to say what its scope is, because a lot of it is secret. But from what we know, it's extremely extensive.
Cool, perfect. Thank you so much. Any others, or we'll get to there were a couple questions about, just very generally, what is the path to becoming a sociologist or a sociology professor, and like some specifics about like, where did you go to school, do you have to move a lot, just things like that.
Sure. So the path is like many things. So I know it's kind of a little hard to see because your school is pretty unusual to teach sociology at a high school level. That usually doesn't happen. So that's pretty cool, actually. But yeah, you're way ahead. So I've never had any sociology in high school. It doesn't exist in Ireland where I grew up. But what happens generally is that people take sociology courses as undergraduates and then go on to graduate school. Now, again, the social sciences in particular, and sociology is one of these. You don't have to take sociology as an undergraduate if you want to sort of study it later. People often come in having worked for a while out in the world doing other things, and they become interested in sort of sociological questions, and then they feel like they want to kind of learn more about the topic, or they do a lot. They read a lot in or study a lot in the humanities and social sciences generally, like they take economics or history or psychology, as well as sort of some sociology courses, and then find their way to sociology in particular. And so after an undergraduate degree, you go to graduate school for 6 or 7 years to get a PhD, and then you go on the job market and hope to get a faculty position somewhere.
And you're sort of at the mercy of that as to where you end up moving, right?
Yeah, it's a feature of the academic job market that people, what it values is sort of the pecking order of universities and colleges, and so it's a sort of national job market. And so, of course, there are some people who have very strong preferences to stay in a particular part of the country, but in general, the job market is a national one, and so people apply to jobs across the country in order to because it's also a competitive and pretty tight job market. So you're not sure where you're going to end up. So I went to graduate school in New Jersey, and then I lived in Connecticut for a while, and then my first real job was at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and then I moved to Duke about 6 years ago. So that's kind of picking around the country a bit, and it was even though I think North Carolina is great and I really like living here, I didn't come here because I wanted to move to North Carolina specifically. That's it's a national market.
Kieran, come on, man. You know you wanted to live in North Carolina.
Well, I do now that I live here. I really want to live here. And it was when we visited, my wife is also an academic. She's a philosophy professor at UNC. And so, we both liked it when we moved. It was good for, if you're a pasty Irish person like me, it's good to get out of the sun. You can't live in Arizona all your life and just shrivel up.
Perfect. Well, do we have any more questions? Sure, go ahead, Mr. B.
How exactly does the math work with the matrices and the whole algorithm thing?
How exactly does the math work with the matrix algebra for the?
Yeah, that was essentially it. Yes, sir.
Oh, well, I can't give you like a little tutorial on how matrix algebra works right now, but the thing, there's two things I will say. One is that in terms of kind of how it works, it's exactly like any other piece of algebra that you do, and the only thing that's kind of neat is the interpretation that the different pieces have, right? So the fact that it's a matrix of people by organizations, it makes it fun, but the sort of mechanics of it are exactly the same as you would learn in an algebra or in a matrix algebra class, and it took the person who developed this specific sort of interpretation, Ron Brager, who's a really quite famous network analyst, who was a colleague of mine in Arizona. His big insight was not developing a new kind of mathematics, right? He used ordinary college algebra to do this work. It was the insight to sort of see the interpretation that could have. That was the big jump. So that's the first part. And then the second part is, of course, that like when it comes to actually, I'm not especially good at math myself, but when you have kind of a whole bunch of computer software at your disposal, you can get it to do all of the hard work of actually calculating out these matrices and pretty quickly, and so that makes things much easier.
I just want that on the record that the professor is saying that he does not feel he's great at math. So if you feel like you're not great at math, there is hope for you still. Don't worry. You don't have to do it by hand like you have to in class or whatever. I don't know.
No, thankfully you do not have to crank out 250 by 250 bit of matrix algebra. That would be terrible.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time this morning. We really enjoyed reading your article in class and really, really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like it's been very enlightening and we've kind of got to touch on a lot of things. Thank you so much for your time, Kieran. We really
Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
All right, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good job, everybody. That's really, really nice to know.
South Park.
South
Looks like he South Parked himself. Excellent. So, reactions. What did y'all think of that? Was that a worthwhile use of our time?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Interesting. I really feel like all of you guys were really, really engaged, although we might need to have a drama class and when we work on projecting our engagedness. Because some of you all, I could tell, I was like, oh man, he's totally paying attention, but you know, sometimes we're not really showing that. But in general, I really appreciate all of y'all being on task. There were some really, really good questions. So good job. Kieran has been a remarkably good sport throughout all this. And if you wanted to send him an email, I'm sure he would love to talk with you about either any specifics or just in general. It's kind of cool to think that someone in this room might end up in his freshman sociology class at Duke. If you go to UNC, you can dual enroll and take a class with them at Duke. So that's pretty exciting. So anytime somebody, that was like a tremendous favor, especially for a professor to sit and talk to a high school sociology class for a little bit. Anytime somebody does us a favor like that, what should we do to thank them?
Send them a card.
Yeah, send them a little card. So let's go ahead and let's draft this up together. I'm not going to ask you guys to write your own because you're not in middle school. But although you did that for Officer Clifton, and he really, really appreciated that. I'm not sure if I told you guys that, but you really made an impact on it. That definitely stood out for him. So A+ there. Let's just make one together, and that way you guys can all sign it, and then we can send it off if Microsoft Word is going to work. And I'm just gonna. Now, when you guys have your job interviews or whatever, it's good just to send an immediate thank you note via email or whatever, but you also need to make sure you actually send a physical letter. So we're going to send this one just saying thank you, so he knows we love him. Cool. And then we're also going to, good Lord, my word is dying.
Oh my God, shut up, door.
My word. Let's see if I can do this with Notepad. Text edit. Okay, this is like formatting free, so if I make any typos or whatever, forgive me. All right, we need to start it, Dear Kieran, because he asked us to call him Kieran, or what should we say? Since we're being formal and send him a letter, I'm going to say, Dear Dr. Healy. What should I say? We appreciate your time. Y'all read that?
Yeah, Faith got a good one.
What, Faith?
I said we appreciate you sincerely, our class.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with our Green Oak High School sociology class.
Are you
Oh, the joys of Monday.
What's today's date?
Monday.
It's Monday.
June 11th? I'm going to toss in an exclamation point because I'm so pumped up right now. So, it's nice. This is also helpful to think about when you're sending a thank you letter, whether it be for college applications or for job interviews. It's nice to reference something specifically that happened. Okay. So, what was something they said that particularly interested us, or whatever?
We like this coffee.
We liked his coffee. We like his South Park avatar. Yes.
Your knowledge of the data collection. That was good, right? That's good.
Very nicely done. Very nicely done. How about
It inspired me.
sure?
I'm looking at sociology. The birds chirping in the background.
I thought that was lovely. I thought that was a really nice touch. Made me feel like. I assume he's just a coach. I think that's a good start. Let's see. We appreciated
Your bird sound.
how you shared
Your knowledge of data collection.
your was really surprised because I've read a lot of articles about Facebook especially using data analysis with the way that they're structuring their work, but I was surprised to hear them say that they were hiring more and more sociologists, so that's kind of cool. Your general career path sociologists, and of course, the bird sounds. Should we end with that?
Yes, please.
I don't know.
In the sentence.
Huh?
The birds chirping.
The birds chirping.
We're talking to a guy that has a PhD, man. We're not gonna tell him that.
How about, I'll throw that in as a PS. PS, everyone really loved the bird sounds.
You gotta make that last sentence grammatically correct.
Well, yeah. So the reason I'm wanting a third one is rule of threes. Sentences and just really everything works better when you have three of something. Like if you tell a joke, you do it 3 times. If you'll notice this if you watch TV. Like a joke will always repeat itself 3 times. And things like this. Sentences work better if you've got 3 things. So what's our third thing? Shared your knowledge of data correction, the general career path of sociologists, and yeah. And we appreciated how you. But I wanted to make sense with knowledge of
The personal opinions.
Yeah, that was really nice of him to go into personal things. He didn't have to do that, but I thought that was fun. And your personal perspective on data collection in the government. How about in the public and private
In the government of the
spheres?
United States.
Because he talked about it both with respect to the United States and the world, and he talked about it both government, the NSA, and like publicly and privately through Facebook. Okay, interesting. Anything else we should add here? I always like to, if I'm doing a thank you letter, or if I'm doing, especially after a job interview, I like to usually end with a, or even just a thank you letter to like my grandma for giving me something for Christmas or whatever. I'll include like a little, I'm really looking forward to seeing you shortly, I'm looking forward to us talking again. So for Kieran, I might say, this was a great experience, I hope that we'll be able to continue this collaboration in the future. This was a great experience. Did I already say that? No. I said that.
This was a great experience for me, including the
I didn't say it in
students.
this email, fine. Our students and we can collaborate like this again in the future. Okay, but I have now mixed up my cases. The beginning is written as though it's from the whole class, and now I'm using I. So how can I rephrase this? We. Or
As a class, we hope we can collaborate like this in the future.
and we can collaborate like this again.
I'm telling you, dude. Richardson, I get like F's on essays. I don't know how I'm doing good on this.
Pardon?
I get like F's on essays that I read. Like, I don't know how I'm doing good on this right now.
You're nailing it. It's all about just being considerate. Okay. XOXO Gossip Girl, what do we say? Smooches. Class.
Oh my god.
It has to be alliterated.
Should we just say Green Dome Sociology, Mr. Richardson's first period sociology, what do you want?
Sociology.
Sea dog, soci class.
2015.
Oh my god.
Alright, we happy with this? Sure. Okay, I'm going to do one thing, guys, that I didn't tell him I'm going to do, but this is going to be, this is what's going to make him really happy. We're going to all sign a copy of this. We're going to send it to him, but we're also going to send it to his boss, just so his boss knows that he's collaborating and doing some public service stuff. And that's going to make his boss very happy, and that in turn is going to make Kieran happy. So all good things. Okay, cool. Well, I don't know if we can, I'm going to try and copy and paste this into Word.
Wait, why'd you say bird songs?
So,
There were no bird songs.
Birds chirping is called ringtone.
Nick, come on, Nick.
Mind games.
TIL, Mr. Richardson style. Alright. Cool, so we'll print that out in just a second. Again, ladies and gentlemen, really, really good job. I found that to be a very, very interesting thing, and I really appreciate the fact that you guys were all on task and that so many of you asked really good questions. Yes? Yes? Okie dokie. Cool. With the remainder of our time in class today, look at all this time we have, we're going to finish up our discussion of Chapter 10, Section 4. So if you can grab a